Welcome. Good afternoon. Welcome to the information session on the Dartmouth financials. I'm Tracy Nordberg. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for the college. And I want to explain a little bit about what you'll be seeing and hearing today. We'll have about a 45-minute presentation on the college financials. And after President Kim's presentation, he'll be joined by Acting Provost Carol Folt and Dean of Faculty, and Senior Vice President Steve Kadish. They are partnering with President Kim to lead the strategic budget reduction and investment process. Their panel will take your questions until we wrap up at about 1:30. The session is broadcast live to the web and will be archived for later. There are media members present in the room, and there are a couple of ways for members of our community to ask questions. If you're here in Alumni Hall, we have microphones at the front of the room, at the left and the right. You can line up at the end of the presentation to ask your questions. If you're in Collis or another remote location, you can send an email in. We'll actually be collecting those questions and bringing them to the panel. In Collis, there are computers in the back of the room. You probably all have your handheld, so you can also send your emails that way. The email address is budgetquestions@dartmouth.edu. We welcome questions from the Dartmouth community, including students, faculty, staff, and alumni. We won't be able to get to each and every question today in the time that we have, but please do send them in and keep coming to our frequently asked questions site on the budget website. Now, let me introduce President Jim Kim.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me start by just thanking everybody in the Dartmouth community for the overwhelmingly warm welcome that you've given to me and to our family. We've become very well adjusted here, and I was at the Hanover Chamber of Commerce meeting the other night and talking about how we found just so many wonderful things about this community. So let me start by thanking you. Today, we're going to do and go through an exercise that many colleges and universities are going through. I think we're going to be quite a bit more explicit and direct than some of our peers. And I'm going to try to share with you exactly what we know about our current financial situation and where we think we have to go. So, to get right to it, what we're going to do today is to talk about our strategic framework. Why is it that we're doing the things that we're doing? Give you a pretty clear, I hope, view of what our financial situation is and what we think it will be in years going forward. And then to talk about how we're going to manage this process as we go forward. So, we have significant gaps starting next year. There are simplistic ways of understanding it. Our endowment dropped. Of the endowment that we have left, we have to be extremely careful and cautious and prudent about the way we spend the remaining endowment. But no matter how you look at it, our financials are unbalanced. We are spending more than we're bringing in. And we've got to get on top of that situation right away. We have made some changes in the way we look at the next 5 years compared to where we were in June. And those changes have been based on what we think are more realistic assumptions about the endowment. I think you will see that the assumptions we're making that get us to the number that was announced a few weeks ago are not doomsday assumptions at all. In fact, they are relatively positive assumptions about what's going to happen in the economy. We have to get to what we think is a more sustainable endowment distribution. In fact, we have to get to an endowment distribution that is much more like where we've been historically, and in a range that all colleges and universities see as appropriate and good stewardship of endowments. But I have to say, nobody knows what's going to happen with the economy. And so it's a very real possibility that things will get worse before they get better. What I can promise you is if things do get worse, we're going to be right back here and talking to you again about how we have to adjust one more time if, for example, our endowment drops again. So we share the same fate with almost all the major colleges and universities who've been more or less endowment dependent. You can see that there's been a big drop. I mean, Dartmouth's actual endowment rate drop was 19.6%, but if you add on to that what we've spent from the endowment, the overall reduction in endowment comes out at 23%. So we're about in range. We're not in as bad a position as others, but clearly, every college and university across the country is trying to respond in some rational, reasonable way. Many of you may have heard that the University of California system just announced a 32% tuition increase, which has students up in arms taking over buildings in Berkeley. They take over buildings in Berkeley a lot anyway, but the 32% was quite a shock. But that's simply what they need to do to get where they have to be in terms of just making their budget. So, you know, we're in a bit more difficulty than some schools. We're in a better situation than others. And, you know, at another time, if you're more interested, we can talk about how the other schools are doing, because we're watching them carefully, and I suspect they're watching us as well. So everyone has done something, and done some things that are really quite significant. Everyone has enacted expense cuts with more planned. I think what you saw is a first wave of cuts, and then another wave of even greater cuts. You know, Princeton, which has 3 times our endowment per student, you know, thought that they might not have to go through layoffs, and of course now they are. And so everyone's been impacted as we have. You know, almost all of them have reduced their workforce. Almost all of them have frozen staff and faculty salaries. They've slowed or frozen hiring and also salaries. And many institutions have halted capital expansion in some way. But for us, I think we have to start with a really clear set of principles. Now, in presenting you these principles, I'm not telling you that we've decided what the answer to these questions are, or, for example, what the Dartmouth experience is. That's a conversation that we're having. But what the board told us when we met in November was that the experience for students, the unparalleled educational experience for students, the ability of our faculty to continue to do the highest quality research as well as bring that research into the classroom and teach the students. The ability for all students, regardless of financial status, to attend Dartmouth, to provide a workplace that respects the contributions of staff and pursues administrative efficiencies, to invest strategically. In other words, they weren't just saying, here's a budget number, go find it and make the cuts. That's not what they were saying. They were saying, we've got a structural gap. Revenues are not keeping up with expenses. We've got a structural gap, and the structural gap happened because of this unprecedented drop in the endowment, and we've got to respond. They didn't say just cut, cut, cut. That's what you're going to do. They also said this is also a time to invest strategically to achieve distinction and take advantage of opportunities. There are some really wonderful opportunities right now for us to grow our work in some areas, and they were clear that we should not back away from those opportunities because of the current budget situation. They also want us to continue to innovate in emerging fields, and they've also suggested that this period could give us an opportunity to improve the collaboration across departments and across schools. So this is not simply a budget-cutting exercise. You know, we've said all along that there are 3 ways that we're going to do what we need to do to get revenues and expenses in line. And that is, we're going to have to make some cuts. There's no question about it. But we're also going to have to raise funds and find new sources of revenue. Are there innovative ways for us to, for example, make the Dartmouth experience open to more people? You know, distance learning. There are all kinds of suggestions that are coming out that I think are very exciting and could potentially help us out of this situation. So this is not an across-the-board exercise. In the meantime, as we think about the different ways of responding to this particular situation, I think we also have to think ahead. You know, when I accepted the Wentworth Bowl from Jim Wright, I was fully aware that I was taking over as president of a 240-year-old institution. And board members and others have been asking me, what will Dartmouth look like in 2019 at our 250th anniversary? And so with a number of us, especially senior staff, and we've talked this over with faculty and some students and others, here is what we'd like to see Dartmouth become by the 250th anniversary. It's hard to do better than to be ranked number one. And you know, we all know that U.S. News & World Report gets it wrong a lot of times, but when they get it right, we should point it out, right? So they deemed us the number one undergraduate education among what the category was national universities. It's hard to build on that, but we will. We'll be even better. More people need to know about what a fantastic undergraduate experience we have here. And our professional and graduate schools are going to continue to get better in terms of their ranking. We know we can do that. It's within our reach. We have leading faculty. Our faculty are among the most widely cited of faculty throughout the United States. We have an outstanding curriculum. We are offering really unparalleled opportunities for undergraduates to do research. We have world-renowned professional schools, and our global educational experiences are unparalleled. We have 3 times the number of undergraduate students taking advantage of study abroad as any other of our peers. So those things that we do well, we have to do even better. We have an opportunity here at Dartmouth for interdisciplinary research that is also unparalleled. You know, it's the size of our community. I don't think that there is another place that has so much concentrated excellence in which the walls between departments and schools are so low. They're still there, but I think they're much lower than at other places, and we feel that we can break them down even further to do very exciting things. You know, even in the 4 months that I've been here, we've had some of the most exciting discussions about the possibility for the professional schools, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, and so many to begin looking at new areas that, frankly, I think to look at new areas and to make advances that perhaps only we at Dartmouth can achieve. We want to be truly the big green. I think that there's a lot of room for us to make Dartmouth the most sustainable campus in the United States. And as we do that, as we've learned again and again, that if we do that, we will also save money. And I think it's a great goal. I think we have a great tradition of being green here at Dartmouth in every sense, and I think we can continue to grow. We also want to be the institution of choice for the brightest and best faculty, students, and staff. I think that Dartmouth, as I've said many, many times, is a really well-kept secret. We have to make it not such a well-kept secret. We have to make this the place to go to take on certain areas of study, the place absolutely to go as a young high school student looking for the best possible educational experience. And most importantly, you know, we do 3 things here. We're very lucky that we can do 3 things here. We teach students, we generate new knowledge through research, and we also have a direct impact on making the world a better place through our medical school, through our business school, through our engineering school. We actually have been able to directly affect the world in a positive way. We do all those 3 things, but at the end of the day, we have to make sure that Dartmouth graduates are the most sought after young people of anyone in the world. They have to be learners and scholars and problem solvers and all these great things that you can see here, leaders, communicators. You know, graduates of the Tuck School of Business are known as great team players. You ask somebody in the business world, what is Tuck known for? They produce great team players. And I think part of it's because Paul Danos has said that so many times to people, people now repeat it back, but it's true. And Paul's a very skilled person, and I think that is related to Hanover. I think that's related to this environment, I think it's related to Dartmouth as a culture. So we want our graduates to be known as the ones you want on your team, the ones you want to join you in your workplace or in your graduate school, because they've had the best experience that they could possibly have. We have to be there. We will accept no less than this at the 250th anniversary, and that's what our board expects. That's what our alums expect. That's what all of you expect. So how are we going to go through this process? Well, we have to plan for the next 5 years, and in addition to being very much aware of the budget gap, we have to be aspirational. We want to save costs, but we also want to improve quality. Now, I've had a lot of experience working in quality improvement in healthcare, and healthcare is one of these places where the notion that quality is free seems to be true. That as we improve quality in healthcare, costs seem to go down. Can we do the same thing in a higher education institution? I hope so. It's something that we have to shoot for. And if we can achieve that, I think that we will set a standard that other higher education institutions will be struggling to follow. The most difficult part is that we have to restructure now to enable rapid recovery, to minimize risk and reduce volatility. Endowments were created to reduce volatility. In other words, the endowments were the way that we got through the rainy day. But what happened, and again, at all colleges and universities, is we began relying more and more on the endowment as endowments grew. So now, rather than endowments being our hedge against volatility, they have become the source of our volatility. All across the United States, colleges and universities are facing the fact that they've relied so much on their endowments that when there was an unexpected 20% plunge, everything had to be rethought. Well, that's where we are. It's a lesson we've all learned together. The good news is that we are still here and we are still strong. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, they aren't here anymore. Who would have thought, even 5 or 10 years ago, that those institutions would not exist? So this is a problem that's hit us, but what we need to do now is to respond effectively and quickly. Everything's on the table. That doesn't mean that everything's going to get cut, but everything has to be looked at. Every single part of the budget has to be looked at, and we have to make strategic decisions. Some things will get smaller, some things will get bigger. If we don't continue to invest for the future, we're going to be in big trouble. Some colleges and universities, perhaps that were less endowment dependent, that have had particularly good fundraising years, who've had major gifts coming in recently, they're looking at all of us who are looking at making cuts and thinking that we'd be a great place from which to poach faculty. We can't let that happen. We've got to retain our best faculty. This is a very important value for me, but it's also the absolutely most important value that we share across this campus and across the board and across the alums, what I hear all the time. We have to make sure that we retain the very top-notch faculty and support them in a way that they will see Dartmouth as the place to be if they want to have great scholarship, do their scholarship, and have a wonderful experience teaching young people. We've got to seek new revenue sources. Again, we've already been talking about this, and I have to say that we've been very encouraged by the suggestions that have already begun to come in. I think there are lots of innovative ways that we can find new revenue sources, new ideas, and grow the revenue base in a way that will allow us to get even better in this time of difficulty. And we want to have a discussion with all of you. As many of you may know, I've already been talking to a lot of groups, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, student groups. Even last night, I talked to various student groups about the situation. We're very committed to open, respectful, and constructive debate. But it's going to be a debate. We're going to have to look at each other's value propositions, look at the way that we are all contributing to Dartmouth College, and find a way forward that makes most sense for Dartmouth College. So here we go. let's take a look at the numbers. What I'm going to share with you today is our revenue, what's known, where's the risk. Look at our endowment pretty carefully. I'm going to describe it for you and describe our thinking about how we want to move forward with it, what our expenses are. I want to give you a little brief snapshot of what's been happening over the last 7 or 8 years in terms of our personnel, and then take a look at the gap that leads us to. So here's all our revenue sources. Now, let me just point out a couple of things. One of the things you'll notice is the endowment distribution from 2008 to 2009 went up $40,000. So that's a 25% jump in, excuse me? Excuse me, yes. I wish it were that, 40,000. So a $40 million increase in the endowment distribution. And that's an increase of 25%, which seems like a lot. And that's not even the entire distribution, because the entire distribution was $26 million more, but that was actually put back in to the endowment. Now, why did we do this? So, it made perfect sense. Some of you will remember that Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa was putting intensive pressure on colleges and universities with large endowments to spend more. He made the argument that this is not fair in terms of intergenerational equity. In other words, he argued that hoarding your endowment now to benefit future generations of students is not fair. You should let the current generation of students also benefit from the rapid growth of the endowment. So spend more, spend more, spend more. And so in the name of intergenerational equity, in order to make use of the growth in the endowment for today's students, we distributed more. Now, if you look at the other revenue sources, there's tuition, there's sponsored research, which is completely fixed. We can't. Those are for very specific things. We can't do anything with it. Look here, the Dartmouth College Fund and unrestricted gifts, $49 million. That's not a lot. That's the most unrestricted part of our revenue, other than a big chunk of the endowment. So the point is, the revenue sources are fairly limited. Endowment's a huge chunk of it, and recently we went up fairly quickly in the amount of the endowment that we spend. But again, for reasons that I think are very clear, that are linked to a particular time in history where there was pressure to spend more of the endowment, and it was based on the I think, entirely understandable desire to let the students of today benefit from the endowment growth. This is what it looks like in a pie chart. These are our revenues in a pie chart. So again, tuition is a huge piece of it. Endowment distribution is the next largest part. Now, 25% is for the entire Dartmouth College, the entirety of Dartmouth College, including professional and other schools. But if you exclude the professional schools and look at just the College of Arts and Sciences alone, endowment distribution is 32% of all the overall revenue. So if it's 32% of the revenue, you can see that fluctuations in the endowment are going to have a huge impact on what we spend. So first of all, there are people in the room who know so much more about this than I do. Q and Julie Dolan are sitting up here in case I make a mistake. But as a simple-minded doctor anthropologist, I have worked very hard to try to understand this. And I'm going to do my best to explain to you the pieces of it that are relevant for us as we think about the budget situation. First of all, this is what our investment portfolio looks like. Now, public equity is sort of day-to-day, what you buy and sell on the market. On any given day, you'll know what that stock is worth because every day, the value of it goes up and down. The reason that the public equity is 27%, but our goal traditionally has been around 40%. The reason it's gone down is because this is the part of our endowment that's most easily converted into cash. So if we need cash to pay for operating expenses, often what we do is sell public equity. So in the process of selling public equity to raise cash, the percentage of our overall endowment that was made up of public equity went from 40% to 27%. That's a concern because right now, as the stock market recovers, the portion of our endowment that is most likely to grow along with the stock market is the public equity. So the conundrum is that part of the endowment which is most likely to grow quickly with the economic recovery is precisely that part of the endowment which we've had to sell because it's most easily converted to cash. Now, down here, marketable alternative equities are basically hedge funds. These are more complicated instruments. We can turn them into cash, but not on a day-to-day basis. And also, it's hard to know on any given day exactly what some of these funds are worth. So these are more complicated and therefore a little bit more difficult to turn into cash. Private equity are a different kind of investment that is the least what the term used is liquid. In other words, it's the most difficult to turn into cash is private equity. Now, there are some institutions that have lost so much public equity that they've had to try to sell private equity, and it's often very hard to do. In fact, some institutions have tried to sell private equity in the past at a fraction of its original value and weren't able to sell it. So we don't want to get into a situation where we're all in these relatively more difficult to sell, more difficult to turn into cash instruments, and what we want is a balance. Now, the problem with only 27% public equity is if the endowment doesn't grow at all, one scenario is that we're going to have to keep spending public equity. The other alternative, of course, is we have lines of credit. We can take lines of credit, and that would give us cash, but then we're incurring debt. So right now, this is where we are. I think we'd like to get to a position where we have a bit more public equity. We hope that the hedge funds and the private equity, rather than being what they call underwater, which means that they're worth less now than what we bought them for, and therefore not giving us any dividends, we hope that the private equity and the hedge funds will now rebound. They're going to rebound more slowly than public equity, but we're hoping that they'll come back. But the difficulty is if we don't have any growth, if the economy continues on flatline or even goes down again, we could find ourselves in a position where we're going to have to spend public equity much more quickly than we'd like, or alternatively, taking out more debt. All this to say that the events of the last year and a half have changed everyone's thinking about how to manage endowments. You may have read a story in the Boston Globe about how Harvard lost $1.8 billion in cash from taking too much of their working capital and putting it into the endowment fund. Complicated stuff, but we didn't have that situation happen to us in nearly the scale. But everyone's thinking about this anew. This is very complicated stuff. The point, though, is there is much more volatility than any of us would like. And we've got to find ways of decreasing the volatility based on whatever the endowment may do on any given day. Q, Julie, am I okay so far? All right. The next thing I want to look at is what we're assuming about endowment returns and how we're calculating the distribution formula. So that means just one thing. I mean, that means these following things. One, what do we think our endowment's going to do over the next 5 years? Because in order to plan, we've got to make our best guess of what the endowment's going to do. The next issue is what's the distribution formula going to be? How are we going to calculate in any given year how much of our endowment we spend on that year for operating expenses? So in June, and again, this is a time when we had much less information. In June, the assumption was that we wouldn't grow at all this year. We might grow 5% in FY11, and in FY12, 13, and 14, we'd grow 10%. Now, with the full understanding of what our returns were for this past year, we calculated that our 10-year performance of the endowment was on average 8% a year, right? So the point I want to make there is that if you look at that particular mix of instruments that we had from the past, this particular mix of instruments and that particular investment strategy, it actually worked really well. So an 8% average growth over the last 10 years puts us in the 95th percentile of all endowment performances. So one can say, well, gosh, we were in a position and, we fell 19.6%. Isn't that terrible? Well, actually, over a 10-year span, even with that drop of 19.6%, our average increase was 8%, 95th percentile. We have done really well. That strategy has worked for us. Our investment office has done a great job, okay? But what we thought we should do is actually base our projections on the evidence that we have in hand. So the evidence we have in hand is that our 10-year performance is 8%. Therefore, instead of thinking that we were going to grow at 10% in these 12, 13, and 14, we've brought that down to 8%. That is an evidence-based assumption about how we're going to grow. We also think instead of 0%, we're actually going to grow some this year, 5%. And we're hoping that we get 3% positive growth. Now, the point that we have to remember is that this projection here, even though it's lower than what we thought in June, it still pegs performance at a track record that was in the 95th percentile. So some people worry that this is too optimistic a projection. From our perspective, this is simply the best evidence-based projection we can make. That's what we did. We still have a lot of the great people who were in our investment office are still there, and we think that we'll be able to do that going forward. This is all very important because the way you make these assumptions has everything to do with how we think about our spending going forward. So this is an evidence-based presumption of what's going to happen. Now, in terms of the distribution formula, this will seem like rocket science to you. I had to look at it 20 times before I actually understood it myself. There are really two different ways of approaching the distribution that are out there today. And in June, we were looking at this model. So this model just says that 70% of the distribution is going to be based on the prior year dollar distribution plus an inflation factor, and in this case, plus an additional 1%. So this particular model, the one that we were thinking about in June, simply says that we're not going to peg a particular percentage. What we're going to do is get to a point, and then for each following year, we're going to look at what we distributed the year before and make that 70% of the number, and then 30% of the number would be the four-quarter average market value of the endowment times 6%. So that way of doing it says that each additional year's distribution will be based on the previous year's dollar distribution, not percentage. So what could happen with this particular model? Here's what we fear the most. If you're saying that last year we distributed $200 million, so 70% of the number will be based on the $200 million. And then what you're going to get to is that if your endowment then drops another 20%, the percentage of the endowment you have to spend to get to $200 million goes up. So we're at 7% this year in 2010, which is quite high. We could be at 9% or 10% next year if the endowment drops again. So while people think that there are advantages because it sort of smooths more, or you have the same amount of dollars coming out every year, the danger is if the endowment drops again, then you're spending huge chunks of your endowment on any given year, and that will begin to get you in trouble, especially with the public equity, the part of our endowment that you can turn into cash. Right? So that's one model. Just base it on the previous year's dollar distribution. Another model, which is the one that was recommended to us by the Board of Trustees, is to bring the rate down to our historic range right away. In the first year, go to 5.4% from 7%, then to 5.3%. In other words, pegging the distribution at a percent, not at the previous year's dollar distribution, and then to use the 70-30 formula up here after that once we get down to a manageable range. So those are the two models. One is to simply peg it to what you spent the year before, and the other is to get it down to the range that we have normally been in. Now, it shouldn't be surprising to you. So the color, I'm sorry for so many colors, but the one that the board has recommended to us, of course, is the green one. Right? And then you'll see, though, what the others look like in terms of distribution rate and in terms of the dollars given out. It shouldn't be surprising to you that this green line, which is what we've called the sustainable rate, which is to get down to 5.4% right away, in what we have talked about as a positive economy, gets us back to where we were at the high water mark sooner than any of the other scenarios. Now, let me just make a point. Getting to the high water mark is not the concern, right? That's not our priority. Our priority is to manage the endowment effectively, turn it into something very positive for our budget, as opposed to allowing it to remain the source of volatility for our budget. Now, colleges and universities are now using 4.5% to 5.5% as the target range for endowment spending. That's what's considered normal best practice. And you can see historically from 1995 until 2008, we were very much and even below that range. That's what we'd always wanted to do. This spike is because of what we said. We took seriously the notion of intergenerational equity and thinking, as everyone else was, that our endowment would continue to grow, we thought it would make sense to do things for the students of today instead of waiting and giving all the benefit to the students of tomorrow. So we went up. Now, there are two ways, the two different models. Now, this is assuming what we call the positive economy, 5% growth this year, 3% next year, 8% every year afterwards. What happens is that if we use the first model, the model which says that endowment distribution will be based on the previous year's endowment distribution, we don't get to the target range for endowment distribution until 2016. And so we're going to be here, but we could be up here. If the economy drops again, we could be higher. So basing it on the previous year's dollar number is worrisome in that we could have a lot of volatility out here. We'll never reach we won't reach, even in a positive economy, we won't reach our target distribution rate until well after 2015. With the model recommended by the board, we go right to the target area, and the distribution rate goes down to our target of 5% by 2015. Now, what if there is a relatively more unpredictable economy? Let me go back a second. These are the numbers we used for the red line and the yellow line. Let's say we grow 3% this year. But let's say we drop 10% the year after that. And then we have up and down results after that. Right? Now, one of the things that colleges and universities did not do, and this is across the board, is that we did not plan for this kind of economy. And nobody did. I mean, it's just very few people really thought, well, gosh, what if we drop 20%? Nobody even considered that, including Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, so we're not in bad company. So we just tried to think to ourselves, what would happen if you had this kind of jagged recovery? And so what happens is that even with a jagged recovery, if we push our rate down immediately to 5.4%, then we stay in the range for the whole time. If we don't, and we base it on the formula of what we spent the year before, we actually never get there. So here are the actual dollar amounts, what that means. Now, this blue line, of course, is the line where I showed you that we don't get to our target distribution rate until well after 2015. So this blue line we think is unsustainable to begin with because it just puts so much volatility back into, it introduces the possibility that our rate of spending, if the endowment drops, could skyrocket up to 8 or 9%. There, you'll see, there's more money coming out earlier, but we're going down in terms of distribution until 2017. So in other words, we'll be making cuts every year until 2017. And if it's an uncertain economy, in fact, it never goes up, and the amount that distributed from the endowment will go down every year out to 2020. The blue line is what's been recommended for us. And if we do this right away, go to 5.4% right away, after 2 years, the endowment distribution starts going up. And we can get to a point where we can begin to grow. Even if we have a slower recovery economy, we get to that point, and starting here, the slope again is upward. So the recommendation of the board, with which we agree, is that we've got to take the green path. No surprise. The green path is always the best path. We're going to take, this is the path that we have to take. We're going with this endowment distribution model because we think it's consistent with much more realistic expectations of endowment returns. It reduces dependence on the endowment, reduces volatility in budget planning. We think it's much more sustainable, and it better withstands risk of another downturn or a slower recovery. Just remember, folks, if we drop another 10%, we were at 7% this year, it's going to go up. The percentage is going to be higher if we take the other path. We have to also get quickly to a base from which we feel confident that we can grow. These are our expenses. So it's actually not at all a trivial exercise to put all of the expenses together in a chart that's this simple. It's taken us massive amounts of work. We're incredibly grateful to everyone in the financial group, Julie Dolan especially. We have worked day and night for a couple of months to try to get these figures which put the entirety of Dartmouth College together in these columns. It's not a trivial exercise. What you're going to see, and again, this is one of the benefits of being in a college or university, our expenses are pretty fixed. This is not like a business where sales go up and down and there's a lot of volatility. In terms of expenses, we kind of know what we have to spend our money on. So there is a pretty reasonable degree of predictability in the expenses of a college or university as compared to other businesses. And what you'll see is there's some flexibility in staff compensation and other expenses. In terms of sponsored research, this is research money that comes to us from the National Institutes of Health. That's extremely prescribed. You're told how to spend that money, so there's no flexibility there. Faculty compensation, you know, one of the great things of being in academia is we have something called tenure. And tenure frees up our professors to be able to say and think and do whatever they think is right, which is something that we must defend. On the other hand, it introduces a lot of fixed costs to what we do. So faculty compensation, we think, is limited flexibility. Facilities, maybe some. Undergraduate financial aid, graduate professional financial aid, limited flexibility. In terms of debt service, we got to pay back our debt. So we're looking at trying to deal with a $50 and then another $50 million in gap that we have to close with a budget that only has limited flexibility. These are the numbers. This is what it looks like in a pie chart. So, of course, staff compensation is the highest number. Sponsored research, we're very happy about this, that it's 17%. This is great. You know, it means that not only are we bringing in research money for our professors, but it means we also recover some indirect costs. And it's good. We want more sponsored research. all of the expenses in travel, that kind of thing, 14%, faculty compensation, 17%. This is what it all looks like. Now, I just want to make a point that these are data from 2002 to fiscal year 2010. We wanted to have a really clear sense of what's growing and what's not growing. And what we found in the college only, the faculty have grown 2.1%. The average compound annual growth rate is 2.1%, with an increase in 70 faculty. Non-teaching academics, research assistants and the like, have actually gone down, as has overall staff. Now, in the professional schools, faculty has gone up, non-teaching academic staff have gone down, and staff have gone up 1.9%, but that's in the context of an explosion in research grants. So, we've doubled the amount of sponsored research, a lot of it in the medical school, and therefore, that increase in staff, a lot of it is fixed and determined by the grants that we get. Right, Bill? Yeah. So, we have a lot of staff, but I don't think that there, in the last 10 years, has been any kind of sort of out of proportion explosion. We're trying to look back before 2002 to see what happened before. But in the last 8 years, just, faculty have grown and staff have grown a little bit less. So here are our assumptions as we go forward and try to get a sense for what the gap is. In terms of revenue, we have tuition. Tuition increases annually, and we calculate that in. We're expecting new endowment gifts of around $34 million annually. The Dartmouth College Fund, our projection is that it would grow 4%. I hope it grows more, but the projection is that it would grow 4%. Oh, and by the way, what I hear again and again and again from alumni is that the Dartmouth College Fund growth, I think, is at least partly dependent on how well we do this exercise. If the alumni feel that we have looked under every stone and we have come to a conclusion about what is critical to the Dartmouth experience and what is not, and we've really done our work, then I personally hope that donations to the Dartmouth College Fund will go up. But I don't think it'll happen until alums are really convinced that we've done all the work we're supposed to do. Endowment, again, we've talked a lot about this. Here are the assumptions. 5% this year, 3% next year, 8% per year beyond that, which is, again, the best we can do in terms of an evidence-based number. We're going to decrease the endowment distribution rate to 5.3%, and then we hope to 5.1% by FY14. We're estimating about $145 million endowment distribution beginning in fiscal year 12. The faculty compensation pool, we think, will increase. The staff compensation pool will also increase. What percentage that will increase is what we have to talk about. We have to fund prior deficits and outstanding commitments by fiscal year 14, and we must have the ability to strategically invest. Again, this is a discussion that we've had intensively with our board. This can't be just about cutting. It has to also be about investing to take advantage of opportunities that are staring us in the face right now. So the overall educational expenses, these are the things that we'd always been considering, goes from 828 to 971. And mostly this is just annual increases. This is what happens to any college university. You have annual increases. It goes up. We had prior deficits, about $46 million worth, that we now are committed to paying off very quickly in this fashion. We think you need a contingency. This is not a 1.5% contingency in fiscal year 14 is very small. We're talking about potential fluctuations in oil prices. That's really what we're talking about. This is what, best practice is to build into your budget some contingency so that if something happens, like oil prices go up, we can pay that off. It's not much more than that. We feel very strongly that a strategic faculty retention and recruitment fund has to be included in our projections. Again, the thing that worries me most is we've got great faculty, and there are lots of jobs open out there. And I think we also have a very unique faculty, faculty that can do both research and teach well. So we're very, very fertile ground for poaching from other colleges and universities, and I think we simply have to commit to keeping our outstanding faculty here in Hanover at Dartmouth College. And strategic investments, by FY14, these two together make up 2% of the budget, faculty retention and strategic investments. And by strategic investments, we're talking a very small amount for opportunities that all of you will identify, and it happens every day. People come up to me and say, hey, there's this great opportunity where we could bring in more resources, bring in great people, but we've got to put some money up front to take advantage of that opportunity. I hear that every day. All of us have aspirations, and we want to set aside a little bit of money so that when you come to me or to Carol or to Steve, we can respond positively. This is, again, this is 1.2% of the overall budget. We think we just have to have it. But it's more than that. We think that we can gain great efficiencies. Not the whole thing, but we can gain efficiencies if we invest a little bit in improving our business processes. And finally, I don't think we can get out of campaign mode in terms of our development activities. The campaign ends as of the end of this year, but we can't quit campaigning. So we're going to have to make more investments in development. And I tell you, our investment in development pays back extremely, extremely well in terms of the donations that come to Dartmouth College. So we think that let me put it this way, this is our best guess at what the budget's going to look like over the next 5 years. Who can know what anything will look like in 5 years? But this is our best guess, and we've been asked to do this. And again, we've worked very hard to try to get rational approach to these kinds of numbers. So we're going to be $1 billion institution by 2014. But what you saw in terms of endowment distribution is that if we're going to be $1 billion institution by 2014, we will have over that time decreased our reliance on the endowment. So then rather than being 32 or 25% of our budget, it's going to be more like 15%. And I think that's going to be a much more manageable number going forward. So these are the gaps. $2.5 million this year, $50 million next year, 96 after that. Now, of course, if we get there and we can find 50 million in reductions, that's not still 96 million. That goes down. So when we talked about 50 million this year and an additional 50 million next year, that's what we meant. If we do nothing, these are the deficits we're going to have every year, and those will compound and add up. So, in the end, we have got to make sure that revenue is greater than expense. I mean, even a simple-minded doctor can understand that business principle. And we have to make sure that the growth rate of our revenue outpaces the growth rate of our expenses. And if we solve this $100 million problem by FY12, then revenues will outpace expenses. Where are we going to look? Well, as we've said, everything is on the table, but that doesn't mean everything is going to get cut. We have to look at everything. Lots of people have told me about the things that they hold most dear and that absolutely can't be cut. So, everything has to be on the table. We have to look at everything. More than anything else, when we decide that we're going to keep something or grow something, I have to be really, really clear as to why that's important so that we can explain to the board and everyone else why, look, we might have to cut back in some of these other areas, but this is critical, and in fact, we have to grow it. We have to think about everything. Can we do better with administrative restructuring and reductions? We think so. Non-compensation savings, we've got to look at it. Compensation and benefits, again, we have to look at everything, and we have to do some tough work in terms of figuring out what the different kinds of changes will give us in terms of overall expense savings. Financial aid savings, I've said again and again and again, this process will not lead to a single student not being able to afford Dartmouth. That's not going to happen. On the other hand, we have to look at financial aid. Are all of our packages, do they all make sense? Are there ways of gaining savings that won't hurt our need-blind approach? Capital project savings and new revenues, we're very committed to the Life Sciences Building and the Visual Arts Center. Are there ways of saving money and bringing in new donations so that these things, the critically important new buildings, are less of a strain on our budget going forward? We have to look at it. Each division, department, and school will be asked to look for savings. Again, we're not going to give you a number across the board. It's not a number across the board. Some programs will grow. And we have to look at new programs and revenue. There are lots of different possibilities that we've already talked about that could garner lots of new revenue, we hope. We've got to keep thinking. So here's what the process will look like. Between now and February, what we're doing right now is defining the process. We don't have all the committees set up, but we've been talking to a lot of people. Steve Kadish and Carol Folt have been leading that process. This is one of our discussions, an open forum. We're going to launch the website, where already people have given us a lot of good feedback. We have to analyze all the savings and revenue for both fiscal year 11 and 12. We have to put a preliminary budget together, and we've got to prepare to implement. February 10th, the reason we talk about that is that's a Board of Trustees meeting. It's not to say that some sort of finality, that things will happen on February 10th. It's just to say that's the next milestone for us in terms of presenting to the board our findings. From February to April, we're going to be implementing the first set of savings and revenues, finalize the budget for the next year, and begin drafting the fiscal year 12 to 14 budget. And of course, it's going to be critical to get input from everybody. From April to September, we will have launched a lot of the initiatives. We'll continue to analyze what we're getting. We'll continue to monitor our financial situation, of course. We'll continue to have information sessions and to communicate. And the fiscal year 12 budget process will continue. By September, though, what we're going to do is to evaluate how well we've done. We're going to make sure that the savings that were suggested or the savings that were promised actually happened. We're going to hold ourselves and, of course, but everybody else at Dartmouth accountable for actually achieving the kinds of savings that we know we need to achieve. This is not what I thought I'd be doing in my first 4 months as president of Dartmouth College. But I have to say that I am more convinced now than I've ever been that this will all happen by 2019. I'm convinced of it. This place is so special. The relationships here are so unique. The people we have here, staff, faculty, students, are so unique that there's no doubt in my mind that we'll get there by 2019. There's going to be some tough going in the next few months to probably a couple of years, but we've got to keep our eyes on the prize. This is a 240-year-old institution. Unbelievably, there have only been 16 presidents before me. This institution will be around for a very long time, and the question for us is what will be the nature of our stewardship over the next few years. At my inauguration, my sister sang the song, "Take Care of This House." And it was very emotional because I sat there emotionally thinking about what a huge responsibility I've just taken on. And while this is not what anyone would have wanted for Dartmouth College today, I am extremely hopeful. Your contributions to the website have already given us a lot of energy and hope that we can figure this out together. There will be layoffs, and I've said that before. But just take one particular just take one particular piece of data. We laid off 60 people in the last round. 25 are back working at different parts of Dartmouth that are growing. Now, when I say we've got unbelievable opportunities in front of us today, I really mean it. Unbelievable, wonderful opportunities based on the outstanding work of faculty and staff here at Dartmouth College. So whatever layoffs we make, we hope that our best staff will simply be coming back later and working in another area which has grown over the next few years. But I don't think we can get there unless we make the tough decisions. And in fact, the decisions that the board has already made for us at our last meeting. So let me stop there. Let me ask Steve and Carol to come up to the front. And we'll take your questions and comments for the next 45 minutes or so. Right? Yeah. Thank you.